well, might as well start then. So I'm David Brownstone. I'm an emeritus professor of economics here at UCI and also a longtime member of the ITS faculty. I've been doing travel behavior in one sort or another pretty much forever. Because I started as an undergraduate working on Dan McFadden's famous study of the BART system, which was one of the early, maybe the earliest attempt to use the kind of models I'm going to be talking about today to predict travel behavior. But today I want to talk about Los Angeles high school students' travel behavior. And I should say at the outset that this is very much joint work with Henry Bernal, who is a PhD student about to finish. Oh, no, he will finish this shortly. And this really is a joint project that's been going on for some time. I also want to acknowledge some key people here. I'm not sure if they're online, but Devin Deming at LA Metro. LA Metro is the organization that runs all the transportation in Los Angeles County. And she is the person responsible for the Go Pass program, which is one of the things that we're actually looking at here. And she has been extremely helpful in getting cooperation and just introducing us to key people along the way. Amanda Penalosa is working with Devin, and she has also been very helpful. The other key person, as it turns out, is Vanessa Landisfein. I'm sorry if I'm mispronouncing your name, Vanessa, if she's on. She is in charge of student services at the Sentinel Valley Unified High School District, which, is that right? Union High School District, which we will abbreviate as CVUHSD. And I'll explain how they got involved at the last minute, but she's extremely helpful in getting this survey done. Jean-Daniel Sephoris and Farzana Khartoun are known to people here. Jean-Daniel's just down the hall, but he'll show up eventually. He and Farzana are working on a similar project using aggregate data to evaluate Go Pass. So they're looking at boardings by Go Pass usage, comparing that to demographics, different areas and whatnot. So what we're doing is really rather different. And of course, in the fine print is the usual disclaimer that we have to put on. And we do very much thank ITS and in particular the money that comes from Senate Bill 1 funding this work. Okay. So why study high school students? Well, there's a couple of reasons. One, they're starting to make their own travel decisions. And at least there's some idea that there are choices that they make as students might influence their behavior as adults. So the idea here is that, these are people who haven't made up their minds yet, and maybe they're more interesting to look at them. Unlike others, they are incentivized to avoid cars. So back when in the prehistoric days, when I was a teenager, as soon as you were 16, you got a driver's license, and if you could possibly swing it, you got a car, and that was a real rite of passage. As you will see in our data, only less than 10% of juniors and senior high school students even have a learner's permit, much less a driver's license. And one of the key reasons for that, there's two key reasons for that. One, and this I know from experience, my son who is, God, he's now 30, but even 15 years ago, insuring him was expensive. So insurance rates have gone way up for teenage drivers. Some of that reflects real costs. But the other thing, which I think is actually the key, is that the law in California changed so that until you're 18, even if you have a driver's license, you can't drive around with other kids. There has to be an adult in the car. This makes it far less interesting. Certainly, when I was a teenager, I would say 99% of the time there were no other adults in the car, and we were going places that the adults probably didn't want to know where we were. Or maybe they wanted to know, but they probably didn't once they figured it out. So they're incentivized to avoid cars, and we're serving a high school population ages 13 through 18. So those under 16, actually under 15 and a half, can't legally drive a car anyway. They're also incentivized to take transit, and that's this LA Metro Go Pass program I'm going to mention shortly. Lastly, they haven't been studied very much. And we came across, there's a number of papers by Evelyn Blumenberg and her co-authors. She's at ITS at UCLA, and they have some papers using the National Transportation Study, NHTS, but most of the reports on this age group in the NHTS are proxy reports. So you ask the parents, how did your kid get to school? Well, if you've ever had teenagers and you're a parent, you know this is, it's not clear the parents know, and if they think they know, they're not maybe giving a good report. So we thought it would be more useful to directly attempt at least to directly survey these students. Let's see. Okay, so what's this Metro Go Pass program? So this is a program that eliminates transit fares for K through 12 and community college students, and I should have added in the LA metro area. So this is the area served by LA Metro, which is mostly Los Angeles County. This started in 2020. So this was, think of this as at least starting out as a COVID program, but it's since expanded to include 17 transit agencies and 113 school districts. And this very much includes the big transit districts, LA Metro, Santa Monica, Municipal, Long Beach, all those are in, and certainly includes the Los Angeles Unified School District, which is by far the biggest school district. So school districts need to pay $7 per student per year. Okay, so there is some cost here to the school district, but there's no cost to the students, and over 375,000 students have obtained a Go Pass. So all students need to do at these participating districts is they can ask for a special reloadable card. If you've ever taken the Metro system, they're called tap cards because they're RFID and you just tap them on the sensor. Then they need to register that card with LA Metro to activate it. So all they really need to do to register is have a valid email address. And of course, in the days of COVID, every student has an email address provided to them by their school district. And so, as I mentioned before, in addition to our looking at Go Pass, Jean-Daniel Sephoris and Farzana have another project, and we also cooperate with them. We meet every couple of weeks together with people at LA Metro to discuss this. So this is a big program, and it does allow students to use transit for free outside of school hours and weekends. You have a question?
Yeah, can I ask a quick question? The 375,000, is that a subset of the total eligible? And so the students opt in?
Yes, the students have to opt in, and as you'll see in our survey, the majority of them don't.
Okay.
So one of the questions that we want to ask here is why?
Right.
I mean, it's free.
Right.
Why? No. At least in my profession, we use, like if something's free. I mean, the only cost is the cost of getting online and registering it. As I said, at least in most school districts I'm aware of, the students are provided an email address, they're provided a laptop, Chromebook. So it's not, the cost of doing this is really pretty low. But many of them don't do it, and some that get the TAP card don't actually register it and don't use it.
I'll add that a specific subset of the students who are eligible don't even know the program exists. And we actually found that about 1 in 4 of them aren't aware of the program in the survey.
Yeah, so, and that's in spite of pretty intensive marketing efforts on the part of LA Metro and the school districts. Because the school districts have to pay $7 per enrolled student. So for them, the marginal cost of having a student getting the TAP card is zero. So, it is, one of the questions is, why? So we'll look into that. Okay, so we started out saying, okay, I mean, LAUSD, the Los Angeles Unified School District, is by far the biggest school district in the area. In fact, it may now be the biggest school district in the nation, I'm not sure. So we thought, okay, we'll survey them. And so one of the reasons we discovered why very little work has been done on this population is it turns out it's really hard to survey them. So first you have to fight with the Institutional Review Board here at UCI, because these are minors. We have to convince the Institutional Review Board here that what we're doing is somehow not harming them. And that took quite a bit of time, like 3 or 4 months. We finally did get permission, and their requirement to have was parental permission, but we finally convinced them that we could put a checkbox on the survey saying, so the students would certify that they had shown the parents what we're doing and the parents approved. Now, I think everybody knows that the average teenager, when presented with such a checkbox, would check it and move on, because this would qualify them for a chance of winning a $50 gift card, which is the survey incentive. So we thought, great. So we just went to the LAUSD and we said, we decided to choose five high schools randomly. But then we ran into the LAUSD Institutional Review Board, which is a separate entity. And they were adamant, and we went around in the circles with this, adamant that it had to be not just parental permission, but it had to be on a hard copy parental permission form. So with Jared's help, we printed up 6,000 parental permission forms on funny colored paper, so it wouldn't get lost in the student's backpack, sent it off to the 5 high schools, or actually 4, because one of the high schools, maybe I will name him, Garfield, never really responded. So something like 5,000 parental permission forms were sent out to students, and at least at some high schools, like LA High, which is another school was chosen, we were in contact with the principals and they were trying to get these forms back. In the end, we got 146 forms back. We surveyed those 146 and we got 27 of those students to do this. Well, if you do the math, the response rate here and the cost is this is not going to work. And in other schools, we weren't getting, even the parental permission forms back. At the urging of the LA high school principal, we actually went back to LA and said, look, this isn't working. Will you let us do this electronically? So survey the parents. And that didn't really work either. So the parents at LAUSD, at least at the high schools, pretty much seemed to ignore all attempts at communicating with them, at least by the district. So we were about, or at least I was about to give up. I think Henry was a little more persistent, and Deming, who at LA Metro, suggested that we contact the Centinela Valley Union High School District. And much to our surprise, they were much more easy to work with. And so they sent out on our behalf online survey invitations to all their students, not quite all their students. We excluded some of the adult students. They have some other programs with roughly 5,700 students. This, I think, started in late February, early March.
Yeah.
And by the end of March, we had 455 completed surveys. And we had, been required by our IRB to translate this survey into Spanish, which Henry did all of it because my Spanish is almost non-existent. And we got out of those 455, 21 were in Spanish. And the survey, one of the constant complaints we got was that the survey looked long. And if I showed you a printout, it's a lot. But in fact, the median duration was about 11 minutes. So, that's not a huge sample size. And I will say up front that we were aiming for something bigger, but this is what we got. So let me just briefly explain where this is. So there are essentially 3 high schools in this district. This is just a high school district. Okay? And as you can see, I don't know how well this map's going to show up. It's kind of a little big, but LA Airport, if you can see people can see my cursor. LA Airport's over here, so it's south, kind of southeast of LA Airport. The district boundaries, I think, go up to the 105. This is the 105 freeway, and this is the 110, and the 405 snakes along here. Okay, And so this is not a super high income community, but not the poorest, very high share of Hispanics. And these are like from the district, so roughly 75%, a little more are Hispanics, and also a relatively high percentage of Black students as well. And so, as I said, the students were sent by the district, and once again, Vanessa Landis-Bing, doctor, was hugely helpful in doing this. Not only did she do it, but she helped draft the emails and quickly turned around our request to send out reminders. So this would not have been possible without her. And the respondents, as I said, were given a 1 in 15 chance of receiving a $50 gift card. And I've done some early work long ago comparing a chance at a fairly substantial reward, because these are high school students, so $50 should be a fair amount, versus maybe paying them $2 or $3, which was sort of standard practice. The gift card typically works at least as well, and it's a lot less work for me and Henry and Jared, because we're the ones who have to process paying this thing out. So this seemed to work pretty well. Initially, we toyed with the idea of giving them a choice of whether it was a Target gift card or a Starbucks gift card. And I think Jared wisely said that's a real pain, so we didn't. But I don't think that mattered much here. Okay, so what does the survey sample look like? So it's roughly 8 or 9% response rate, which doesn't sound great, but it's actually pretty good. So the first thing that we noted that looked a little fishy was the self-reported GPA. So the blue is A or higher. So there's two possibilities. One is that the sample who responded are good students. The other possibility is that there's grade inflation going on, worse than I thought, or some combination of the two. I did ask at one point if for what the grade distribution in the district is, and I don't recall that we got a response. So if Vanessa's online and you want to put in the chat how far off this is, that would be good. In terms of the sample composition, we oversampled, or undersampled ninth graders a little bit, and we had a cutoff of 13 years old. Once again, that was also put in by the Institutional Review Board. We're not allowed to survey anybody under 13. So it's possible that some of these ninth graders are actually 13. And so maybe that's what happened, or maybe they were just, busy with other things. But this doesn't look too bad. Now we're going to get into the reason why we did this, which is to look at how Go Pass usage relates to their transportation activity. So we looked at two things. So first we looked at household vehicle use. And so the first thing we looked at is driver's license. So first of all, you can see just in the top line, out of the sample we have, which is 304 plus 118, the majority of them do not have a Go Pass. And that's consistent across the whole Go Pass program. That percentage has gone up over time, but it's still well below 50%. Right? And if you look, perhaps not surprisingly, it looks like those who have Go Pass are less likely to have a driver's license or a learner's permit than those that don't, which is not a surprise, but that difference is not significant. What is significant is that we also asked how many vehicles were in the household. So the people without Go Pass have more than 2 vehicles per household on average, whereas those who don't, it's below 2. And that difference is significant. The other thing we looked at is we asked them, so the survey has a lot of parts. One part of it asks what modes are available for their trips to and from school. Right? And so we just tabulated that against having a Go Pass. And here you can see there are some differences. The key difference is public transportation. So those who don't have a Go Pass, roughly only a quarter of them claim to have access to public transportation, whereas it was at least half for those who did have a Go Pass. So that, I mean, that makes sense. If you're in an area that's not served by public transportation, then, there's not much point in having the Go Pass. And there's also a slight, actually significant difference in the availability of cars. So we asked two questions. One, how many cars does your household have? But we also asked, are these cars available for your trip to and from school? So those are two different questions. So the household may have a car, but if your parent takes it to work before you have to go to school, that's not available. Okay, and you can see there is a lot of households, 85%, who don't have a Go Pass do have a car available. So, but a reduced percentage, but still a lot, 75% do. There are also some differences, and there's quite a few differences between the modes available to school and the modes coming back. So you notice that the car availability for the trip from school is lower across the board, and also significantly different between those who have a Go Pass and those who don't. Likewise, the difference in the availability of public transportation is also larger. So
What's active transportation?
after transit is walk, bicycles,
Like bicycles, scooters, e-scooters.
yes.
Yeah.
Anything that elevates your heart rate.
What about scooters?
That's also included.
That's also in there.
We asked them separately, but because so few of them picked bicycle individually or scooters individually or e-bikes individually, we just decided to kind of collapse it into one category.
I wonder if high school kids have discovered scooters to the same extent as students at UCI.
I don't know, and I don't know, because we got involved with the CVU HSD rather late in the game. We didn't really have a chance to have a long discussion as to what kind of student parking they had, what facilities they had for bikes or scooters. I mean, one of the big issues about bikes at school is bike theft. So, I mean, we're here at UCI, my son is down at UC San Diego, and there, the mean time to theft of a bike seems to be a couple of weeks. You're really careful. So that is an issue. We did not, that was not part of the survey. So the survey is long enough as it is. Jared, are there questions that are popping up in the chat? Because if they are, I'm happy to.
Nothing yet.
Okay.
Can you cover the sociodemographics of the school, the students? Like, is it a wealthy area? Is it a low income area?
I'll let you know.
It's relatively low income, very high share of Hispanics, higher than average share of Black students.
Yeah, we didn't, I mean, we've sort of looked at this a little bit, but we just got, I should have said at the beginning, this is, hot off the presses. The survey ended in March, but right at the time the survey ended, we started another big project, which I will discuss at the end, which is a much bigger survey of Los Angeles community college students. And so this has been, so it was only when Victoria reminded me that I agreed to give this talk, I said, oh my God, we gotta figure out what we're doing here. So this has been banged out rather rapidly. What we did do though, so there was a bunch of things we asked. We also asked a bunch of attitudinal questions. I believe these particular questions were only asked to seniors. And so we asked a bunch of questions about their concerns about the future. And so this graph shows, we asked about neighborhood safety, transit safety, their ability to afford living independently, which is getting at this issue of housing affordability, impacts of climate change, and affording a safe place for families. So the way this was scaled, these are a 5-point Likert scale. So the more you agree, the more you're worried about it. And the first thing to note is that there's no real difference here between whether you have a Go Pass or not. And the second to note is that pretty much across the board, yes, people are worried about safety, but they're worried more about transit safety than they are about safety in their neighborhoods. So we don't know whether this is a concern about safety at bus stops or train stations versus, onboard safety problems. As you know, in the press, there's been some really nasty incidents in LA Metro lately, a couple of deaths. But this is just a general question. And second, lastly, I guess of this part of the talk, we asked, why don't you have a go pass? This seems like the simplest way to see what it is. And so the first answer is speed. Other modes are faster. Okay. The second one is other modes are safer. And the third one, and I don't think there's a significant difference between 2 and 3, is that the parents do not consent. So the simple answer, why the kids aren't getting go pass is that they don't, the two obvious ones are the ones that we've always talked about, which is speed and safety. Okay. And the parents not consenting are obviously related to the safety part, or not. I don't know for a fact, but they probably are.
But then if they don't have cars, what faster mode are they going to use?
Well, wait, they have cars.
I thought you said that there was
No.
very small,
Look,
Well, they have access.
85% or 70. This is car availability.
right,
So by car in this population, it means someone else is driving you.
right, your
Typically
parents are driving you to school.
Yeah. So if the choice is to walk to the bus stop to take a bus, or have your parent drive you to school,
And pick you up.
and fewer of them get picked up. But yeah, so you have to be careful here when we're talking about car as a mode. For most of these kids, because most of them don't have a driver's license, for most of them, they're being driven by somebody else. And unless it's doing it illegally, they're being driven by an adult, because they're not. It's not legal to be driven by another student. Okay, so what I'd like to do, since I'm running out of time here, I want to spend the rest of the talk talking about the stated preference part. Because this is somewhat interesting and the results came out somewhat surprising. And the reason we put in this stated preference experiment is we're only surveying a small set of schools in a relatively homogeneous place. There's not going to be a whole lot of variability in travel time and cost. Okay, so how are we going to, and we want to look at, from a policy standpoint, things like value of time, how much you have to change prices to get people to take transit, all those questions really cannot be answered with just looking at what people do, which in my world is called reveal preference. So we administered 3 stated preference questions. I'll go through this quickly and back up if there's questions. The design we used had 5 attributes with between 2 and 4 values per attribute. And we customized this to 3 scenarios. So we also wanted to see if there were differences between different trip lengths. So we asked them about a 12-mile trip, 7-mile trip, and a 2-mile trip. Okay, so this turns out to be fairly complicated. We use the NGene software, which I guess is the state of the art. This is done by John Rose and his colleagues in Australia, to find a de-optimal design with 24 blocks. And so I'll explain what that is. All I will say, though, is that doing this in Qualtrics requires a fair amount of really nasty HTML coding, which we kind of had to learn on the fly. The de-optimal means that the design is optimized for estimating models with the conditional logit choice model. And as Henry pointed out to me, last week, he says, wait a minute, you're, using this simple logit model, but didn't you publish a bunch of articles claiming that wasn't the best? And the answer is yes. And what's more, I've published some articles, including, I think, one of my most cited articles, claiming stated preference doesn't work either. So, but they can't fire me. I retired. So, In any case, so this is what this looks like to the respondent. So this is literally a screenshot. The other constraint we had is we assumed, and actually, did you ever look to see how many people took this on a phone versus a computer?
I did not see how many took it under mobile phone, but
Yeah.
we did optimize the the actual viewing. We actually made the response, the design optimized for mobile phone viewing as well.
Right, and so it might have been better to actually have 4 alternatives, so we could have included walk and bike and other things explicitly. But it turns out there's no way to fit more than 3 columns on a cell phone. So this is what it looks like if they were doing it on a laptop, okay? And so they look at each alternative. And across the different blocks, people are going to see different things in all the headings. They're going to see different travel methods, different times, different costs, different wait times. The Wi-Fi availability, the reason I put that in is that's something that actually LA Metro could do relatively cheaply. And it's also something that I studied as a sort of a consultant for Sandag in San Diego. So I had some data to compare it to. So this is the behind the scenes. So this is the document that Henry and I and Brooklyn Nguyen, a person we hired to help us, we needed to program this into Qualtrics. So this is the document that actually describes what the beginning, you can see what the instructions are. So, and this is literally what we wrote.
Question?
Yeah.
It seems like these travel times are really high. Isn't the school district not a huge one? So how could you even travel for 70 minutes within that district?
But I'm not saying that nothing in this instruction says that you're traveling within the district. We're surveying students in the district. These guys live, 8 miles to the beach, maybe 10 miles.
Oh, so this is not a trip to school?
No, this is
No.
not a trip to school. It's a trip to nowhere. What's on the top is exactly what the instructions are, no more, no less.
All right.
Okay. So these are the attributes for the 12-mile trip. And so, by 24 blocks, it means there are 24 sets of these things that have different values. Anyway, I'll skip over this stuff, but you can see for the 7-mile trip, the travel times and costs went down. Now, this is one where we almost faked ourselves out because we thought at the end, well, a 2-mile trip, they could have just walked. So you notice at the bottom here, I add, would you prefer to walk instead of the travel method? And it turns out roughly half the people did.
We have a comment from the audience. Devin Denning noted that LA Metro does happen to have Wi-Fi on most of their buses and trains.
Okay. Well, that's why I like to cooperate with people like Devin, because we
Thank you, Devin.
find out all sorts of stuff. Okay, so and as I said before, we had like 455 responses. Not everybody, it is a long survey, not everybody filled everything out. And some people, filled things out and left some things blank. But at the end, we had 351 respondents that filled out all 3 of these tasks. Okay. Now, as I mentioned, this short trip scenario includes a separate walk alternative. So this actually complicates the analysis a little bit. So if the respondent chooses walk, then we actually have a partial order. So let me back up here. If the respondent chooses walk and they made a choice up, down at this your best choice, we actually know what they think their best choice is among the 3 non-walk alternatives. And we know that walk dominates that. So this is a partial order. And so this actually provides more information. If they don't choose walk, then all we know is that walk is not preferred to whatever they chose before. So if you write out the likelihood equation, it gets a little bit complicated. It turns out if you use logit, which I'm going to use, then it's actually pretty simple. So I'm only going to present results here. Conditional logit results with no demographics. However, the experimental design will support putting demographics in rather simply, and will also support some, things like mixed logit and other more complicated choice models. I'm going to argue that that's probably not necessary, but we'll see. So first of all, if you're doing stated preference, one of the things to realize is that this is a made up world. Okay, and it's made up by us for setting the attribute values, but it's also made up by the Engine software. And so the first column here says how many times these particular modes were presented. Okay, and you can see that car is not presented very much. And the reason for that is the Engine software notices that car has good alternatives and is likely to be chosen a lot. And so they want to set the experimental design in such a way that basically all the options are chosen about as much as you can. Now we constrain that because we don't want what are called dominated alternatives. We don't want to present them with something that's clearly worse along all dimensions. So as you can see, bus, and the other column here was how many times these were chosen in the stated preference. Okay? And so the big differences you can see are car. So car was only offered in 5% of the choice sets, but it was chosen in 10%. The other one, let's see, Metro Micro was the other way around. So Metro Micro, I should mention, is a on-demand service operated by LA Metro. So you call up, I think it's $2.50 a ride. There's a delay because, and you may have, it is not door to door. You may have to go to a corner or something, but it's sort of a in between, the standard bus service and something like Uber or Lyft.
So how many scenarios were offered? Was it 3 scenarios?
Each person had 3 scenarios.
So that's where you get these numbers like.
That's why the numbers are bigger, right? And walk was offered to everybody in the 3rd scenario. I don't know why that's not 351 there, but so like I said, this is work in progress. But the point here so one way of knowing whether the stated preference, the whole apparatus is working, is to do a diagram like this and make sure that, at least most of these modes are being chosen enough so that you can get decent estimates. Okay, so this is the only equations in the whole talk, which is unusual for talks I give. So we're going to make a lot of assumptions in order to do what I'm going to do in the next slide. So I'm going to assume that all respondents have the same utility function. Say nothing. The error terms and the error, so the utility is going to be written as VNI, which is going to be the measured part, and the error term epsilon NI, and down here. And so we're going to assume that these error terms are independent across these choice scenarios. And that's an assumption that's pretty strong, because it says that the students are taking each scenario independently. There's no correlation. So a student who likes walk is not a good example, who likes self-driving car and chooses it in scenario 1 is more likely to choose it in scenario 2. We're assuming that's not true, okay? More importantly, we're assuming that respondents are choosing based on their preferences, and they're not using these hypothetical choices to try to influence policy. Now, there's probably not such a big issue in this case. It is a huge issue in studies I've done. For example, in California, we've done a lot of studies on demand for electric cars. And there you could imagine someone who's really worried about climate change would, in this made up world, say, sure, I'm going to choose an electric car. That's going to show these policymakers that I really care about it. But when presented with a $50,000 Tesla versus a $20,000 Toyota Corolla, are going to choose the Toyota Corolla. And that's in fact what happened until recently. Okay, so the other assumption I'm making here is that this VNI, which is measured utility, I'm just going to approximate by a linear function of the attributes. That's this beta prime XNI. Under the assumptions I made, the probability that you choose alternative I, which is P and I, is just given by that rather simple formula. Otherwise, for those of you who are following at home, this probability, with 3 or 4 alternatives, requires evaluating some integrals. So if you made this, if you said the epsilons were a normal distribution, you couldn't write this in nice closed form. And then the last step is to figure out what the log likelihood is, which is down on the bottom. Y and I is just one if a respondent N chooses I and zero otherwise. This is basically adding up the log of the probability of the chosen alternative. That's all that it is. And we estimate the parameters by maximizing this. Okay? And I guess this is not that new an idea, but it's not that old either. As an undergraduate, I actually wrote the code for the first commercial software that did this. It's called Quail for those of you who were around back then, which I don't think just me and Jan.
McFadden with Professor McFadden.
Professor McFadden hired me as a programmer. I had taken exactly one economics class at the time, but I could program Fortran, and so that's how I got into this. Well, all right, we'll come back to that. Okay, so having done all that, but this is now standard. I mean, you can get this and let me back up. Henry reminded me. In our situation, I've got N here as indexing the respondent. To be more correct, there actually should be two subscripts: household N, scenario J, choice I. Okay, but the thing is, I'm just adding them all up. And furthermore, I'm going to add for the walk alternative an additional thing. So for the third scenario, everyone's going to get 4 alternatives because walk's going to be in there. But for those who chose walk, I also have this partial order, so there'll be another 3 alternative choice. And so doing this without making the logit assumptions is going to require some programming. But since we only had a few hours or so to do this, that wasn't likely. Okay, so these are the estimates. Now, a couple of things here. I stuck in pseudo R squared because every time I published a paper, someone wants it. Henry points out it's pretty much nonsense. I agree, but it's there. So this model that I'm presenting here is a joint model. And so there's 16 parameters. I did test this versus an unrestricted model. So we could apply this choice model separately to each 3 scenario. And that would allow us to test whether the people's preferences change over these distant scenarios. And in fact, they do change. But what this joint model shows is that I can parameterize that change by simply looking at the alternative specific constants. Okay, so the way to think about this, just briefly, so the first set of alternative specific constants are all relative to the base alternative car. So the way to interpret these things is to say, okay, suppose all the attributes were the same. So travel time, wait time, travel costs, and Wi-Fi were fixed. So these alternative specific constants you interpret as the relative utility for these other modes. So as I said, so these are all negative. So car wins. Okay. And remember, just as I point out, Jan, car in this case probably means having your parents drive you. But that's okay. These alternative specific constants for bus and scooter in particular change with trip length. So for the shorter trips, bus is less harmful or less not preferred. Scooter almost gets to the point where it's still negative, but much less negative for the short trip. Now, the reason for doing a stated preference study is it allows you to look at trade-offs. So the obvious trade-off is value of time, which is simply ask the question, how much money do you have to give someone to make them indifferent between taking that money and waiting and spending an hour traveling? And the answer is $47 with the standard error, roughly 28. That sounds high, but I'm going to argue it really isn't. And it's pretty similar to other results. Now, the value of wait time, so we separately look at, and this is pretty common in this literature, to look separately at travel time and wait time. And what we show here is that the value of wait time, people dislike wait, they don't like traveling, period, but they really don't like waiting. The value of wait time is almost twice that. And that also highlights kind of one of the problems with transit versus the car or these other modes. I mean, if you're going to have a transit system, there's going to be some waiting, and that hurts. Yes.
Do you have a theory on why wait time? I could come up with one, but do you have a theory on why wait time is so unpleasant, doubly unpleasant?
Well, in the context of this survey, where I think most people are thinking about waiting in terms of bus or car. I mean, this is LA, so they're waiting outside. Although we did the survey in March, so the weather's nice, but it may not be so nice. It also relates to these safety concerns. And we did not specifically ask whether their safety concerns were on the bus themselves or at the stop. My guess is it's probably more at the stop. And so if you're worried about safety, the longer you have to sit at the bus stop, kind of exposed to the world, the less pleasant it is. So I think that's, but it's also related to reliability. And Henry is proposing a follow-on study for next year where we're going to look more closely at that. Not necessarily with this group, but hopefully with also with the help of LA Metro. Now, walk is interesting because it looks like it has a negative coefficient of minus 0.86, but I didn't put in any value of travel time for that because it's the same. And so if you ask Professor Google, how long does it take to walk 2 miles? The answer is pretty close to 40 minutes, which was actually the number Henry gave me when I asked him. So if you stick that in, it turns out that walk has a positive coefficient. So it is actually preferred to car.
We have a comment
Yes.
from Emily Parkerney from the Vermont Agency of Transportation.
Oh, hi, Emily. Geez, I didn't realize, I hadn't seen you in ages.
So Emily, I'm going to share your comment and I'm going to invite you to unmute yourself and kind of share it yourself. And actually, we invite anyone, by the way, online to unmute yourself and contribute. She says, I think the high cost of wait times is consistent with waiting for transit literature.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yep. Thank you. Emily, for those who don't know, was.
Hi, David.
Hi, Emily. And Emily was a student quite a long time ago. I don't remember how long it was, but anyway, it's good to see you or hear you. I can't see you or the way this setup is. Anyway.
That's okay. Yeah, I think my PhD is 1999 maybe. So a while ago.
Okay. All right. Well, then you'll probably remember the next reference I'm going to give in the next slide. Okay, so value of Wi-Fi, you can look, Wi-Fi is down here, it's positive 0.49. And we have, the value of money here is basically the travel cost. You can divide the two. And so this claims that people are, if you pay someone $14 and give them Wi-Fi, they're indifferent to not having Wi-Fi. And that sounds ridiculously high. Except when I did this study down in Sandag, which was done on the general population survey, I think it was like 2014 or 2015. So it happens we came up with pretty much the same number. And so the reason I put Wi-Fi in here was twofold. One, I could compare it to something. And B, this is something that transit agencies can do these days. It's not too expensive to add Wi-Fi to a vehicle. Now, the other thing that you can look at here is you can look at the value of car relative to bus. And once again, this is just using the coefficients and adjusting things so that, how much would you have to bribe someone to get them to take a bus over the car? And that turns out to range between $29 and $39 with these estimates based on scenario. So the short scenario is $29, the long scenario is $39. That also sounds high until you consider the experience of places like London and Singapore and others that have put in congestion costs. And the London congestion cost is up to around 15 pounds. I did not bother to look up what the pound is worth these days, but I think it's close to 20 bucks. Plus you got to pay for parking. So those are examples of, out in the real world where those kinds of fees are actually being applied, and you do see a lot of people getting away from cars. New York, I believe, is getting close,
$15.
$15. Well, if they manage to get it past the latest court challenge. So we'll see what that does. But the point is that these numbers that, remember, these are hypothetical questions asked at the end of a long survey to a bunch of high school students. And what I find pretty remarkable is that the answers we're getting here seem to be consistent largely with a lot of data that we've had before.
Professor Brownstone, I have a question. So the value of time, do you use the coefficient times 60? And
Yes, yeah, because yes, travel time in the survey is measured in minutes. Traditionally, we talk about travel value of time per hour. So yes. Formula is 60 times, what is it? Weight, the travel cost divided by travel time.
Beautiful. So you said they're high, but they're high for low income students. I mean, like they're high as a baseline, but you're talking about low income students, they seem really high, right? $47.
Well, maybe, but, all right, I'm gonna jump here a little bit. It so happens that this is a shameless self-plug. But I think the paper by Brownstone and Stamets, Seiji Stamets was another student here, who's currently, I think, dean at Cal State University Long Beach. He went to the dark side. But we looked at actual behavior on the I-15 express lanes in San Diego in 1999. Emily might remember this. And so here, this is real behavior. These are real people. They're all getting on pretty much the same place. I can't remember the name of the stop. It's where the tollway starts. And they're driving roughly 8 or 10 miles to downtown San Diego. They're coming from wealthy suburbs of San Diego. So this is not a low income group. And there's no issue here. They're paying real money. Okay. And turns out that there's a lot of econometrics here because it's actually very hard to measure accurately the time savings from this, to the point where we actually, or Ken Small, who some of you may remember, and I actually hired a student to do what we call floating car analysis, which is a euphemism for getting in a car at 4 a.m. with a stopwatch, driving down the I-15 to see how long it took at various times and comparing that to the free flow in the lanes. When we went through all this rigmarole, and I pulled up the paper again, and lo and behold, the result in 1999 was $30 an hour for a high income group. If you take $30 an hour and just expand it by 1.88 off the CPI, you get $56, which is pretty close to 47. So that's the sense in which, at least in this domain, I'm not so sure that all the demographics of things we put in are really going to matter all that much. I mean, this is subjective value of time. Okay. But I think in terms of using these results to get some idea of what we need to do to sort of move, if the purpose of the exercise is to try and get more people taking transit, that I think this kind of exercise gives you the kind of numbers that you really need to think about. So, I mean, one way of looking at this is saying, look at all these negative numbers for the alternatives to the constants. And if you look at the value of them, they're all in the same range as, car relative to bus. We're going to have to really penalize car use if we want to get this. You can't, we made bus free. You can do that. And that moves the needle a little bit. But the real problem is the other side of the coin.
The bus would have to cost $40 for it to
No.
making it free.
You have to pay someone for it. Yeah. So in addition to giving them a go pass, you have to pay them $40.
Or else if the bus costs $40, if the bus fare was $40 and you got rid of it, that would do it, but it's not $40. It's
Okay.
much less.
Well, but if you look at the work that's been done in certainly in London and Singapore, and you look at the congestion externalities and add up all the other externalities, these fees of the $15 to $20 range to drive into a congested area are not, can be justified economically. And if those fees were put in place, you will see change. And I would bet here that you could actually get a fairly decent estimate of how much change you would get, even looking at this relatively, admittedly, simplistic stated preference model.
We have a few audience contributions.
Okay,
Emily wanted to share with you that she thinks her transportation science PhD, that you were on her committee.
I believe I
In
believe I was.
2002. Jaehyun Kim shares, and all of you who are commenting, we do invite you to unmute yourself and speak up, but I'll give your comments. Jaehyun Kim says that I prefer taking the bus for longer than 2 miles to walking. 7 or 12 miles is way too long to take a walk. We all agree. And Emily shares again, I would assume that the VOT of high school students is lower than VOT of an adult.
Okay, well, we'll find out because, first of all, let me just briefly go through, I think, yeah, there's only one more slide. So the bottom line here, I take away from it is that students value speed and reliability. The question about walk for more than 2 miles, we didn't offer walk as an alternative except for a 2-mile scenario. So, but for 2 miles, it looks like walking is actually preferred to car. Otherwise, car is best. So, if you're a student, remember, car here means you got to talk someone into driving you somewhere, most of these people. Walking, they can do by themselves. We did not separately look at biking. We did, e-bike. We don't have a separate bike alternative. One of the reasons for doing that wasn't all clear what kind of attributes to put in for it. But also, even though this looks like a pretty simple stated preference, given the constraint that it had to fit on one phone screen, it's not much more we can do. But the other thing that I really do stress here is that, and this is somewhat to my surprise, overall, the results we got is what I would expect from a general population. So that this, the notion that these high school students are some bizarre subpopulation that we have to treat separately, this doesn't seem to apply. Couple of things we could do to make this better. We can try adding some demographics and background variables, and Henry's done some of that, has done some of that on particular looking at the decision of whether to get a go pass or not. We could analyze the data we have on trips, and I thought we might have something to show for that today, but that didn't happen. More importantly, we could replicate and extend our work to a new sample. And so it happens we have ending today
At 11:59 PM.
and you're going to be up at 11:59 to turn it off, not me. We've got a survey of Los Angeles community college students where we've got permission and a lot of help from the community college district. In fact, they gave us the roster, all the names and the emails of all 115,000 of their students. And in order to get our sample, which is actually now 2,600, we actually had to email all of them like twice. And I won't bother you with the details, but let's say that the OIT here at UCI has made that process extraordinarily painful. But we did it. In that survey, we haven't really looked at it other than to make sure that people were filling it out. But that will be chapter 4 of Henry's dissertation, or 3.5, and so that'll be the next talk. But that's a much bigger sample. It's a much wider group. So the question of what happens if you do this, because of the timing, we ended up using the exact same SP design. So we can tell immediately whether there are going to be big differences in the preferences of these two groups. Not immediately, we still have to process the data, but pretty quickly. Okay, so I think yes.
Yeah, I have a quick question. Can we use the benefit to justify the cost of the Go Pass program? The reason why I ask is another program is Metro Micro in LA area, the micro transit. For each ride, the LA Metro need to subsidize $43. So I'm wondering, like, we're giving this free transit for the high school student, can we use the benefit to justify the cost?
Yes, we could. If you believe the stated preference results, we can figure out what the value to the student is of the trip, and we know what the cost of the district is. And if Devon's still here, she could tell me what it costs LA Metro to provide a ride. That's not a calculation we've done yet, but yeah, we should put that on the list of things to do because that's something we could do. That'd be interesting. I can't do it off the top of my head, so.
I see.
But yeah, Metro Micro is quite expensive. And that's, but we also included, the reason we did not include Uber or Lyft. A, because it's illegal for Uber or Lyft to pick up a single
Okay.
person under 18. So we didn't want to give them an alternative that we knew was illegal, although it certainly happens. But we did put in self-driving robo taxis, which don't quite exist yet, but they do in Phoenix, I guess, and maybe there's some parts of LA. And I don't think there's a restriction on minors using those things. That's an interesting question. But those were not preferred. People didn't like those. I don't know why they did, the thing about this kind of study is you don't know, it's a made up alternative. We don't know if they didn't like it because it's new and they were worried about it, or they didn't like, they thought it was unsafe because there was AI driving the car instead of human. I don't know.
We have a question and a couple of comments from the audience. You might have just answered this question while I was thinking about the questions.
Okay.
Jae Hun Kim says, then would taking transit not be an option for minors? Then he says, such as impaired people?
No, the transit systems are required and do accept all comers. And I think if you're severely handicapped in a wheelchair, they have to, there's paratransit services
Right.
provided, but buses, I think all the LA Metro buses at least are, I don't know if they're wheelchair compatible, but they're certainly, the buses kneel and.
Okay, so Jaehan, let us know if that didn't answer your question. I'll give a couple of comments, and Jaehan, you just pop in if that didn't answer your question. Emily mentioned that, and she had to leave, so she's not here, but she mentioned that a disadvantage of transit compared to car is the time and effort to get to the bus stop. Recall cars and ride sharing are door to door.
Well, Metro Micro is not door to door. That's be careful there.
Okay. Joseph Chow shares that there's a survey conducted in Greater Toronto of post-secondary students that might help later research. He gives us a link, which we'll share with you.
That we would like to see.
Great. Thank you, Joseph. You have thanks from many people in the audience. Tanjeeb Ahmed said it was really informative. Thank you very much. Matt Friedman says, thanks. It's super interesting. Devin Deming lets you know that she's still here. She says the net cost of the Go Pass program is approximately $20 million annually for the region, which she explains as LA County. And she adds that people ages 13 and over can ride unaccompanied. And yes, all buses are ADA accessible.
Thank you, Devin.
Our director, Steve Ritchie, says this is really interesting. Thanks very much.
Okay.
Yes. Did you try to incorporate any individual characteristic like the attitudes you mentioned in the modeling process?
We could. We have not had a chance to do that yet. Although our ability to do that, back up here, the standard errors on these things, the extent that we computed them, are pretty big. So yes, the value of time, I guess we could make that a function of some demographics. But given how poorly estimated it is, but that's, that's partly a function of the design of this study was designed to get these parameters well estimated. The value of time is a ratio. You don't get, and the issue of how to design the study to optimize, these derived values is actually tricky. But yes, but it would be fairly straightforward to interact value of time, for example, with various demographics. I haven't tried it yet here. I've certainly tried it in other studies. The one I mentioned with Seiji Stamitz had a lot of interactions. With the new survey from LA Community College District with 2,600 respondents, obviously we have a lot more scope for doing that. So thank you.
Do you have any other questions?
Have you ever considered including GoPass dummy or value to this model?
Yes.
Yeah, I know it's a little bit.
Ideally, Henry's built some choice models for GoPass treating those as, treating that as an independent choice is obviously, but it's certainly feasible to do a joint model.
Yes.
So to model both the choice to the Go Pass as well as model these stated preference things, that would be an interesting extension.
Yeah.
But we haven't done it.
I hope so. Please.
And as long as we stay in this logit world, it's fairly easy to do, but once you, get to more complicated mixed logit models, adding each one of these things, takes what something you could do on a laptop in 30 seconds, something that, takes days on a fast computer.
Yes.
Great.
Right. With that, on behalf of all of us, allow me to thank you very much for coming. Thank you to our studio audience. To our, what do they call the people on TV? Our TV audience? What do they call them?
The studio audience.
Yeah. I mean, but the ones over there, what are they called? The TV audience?
I don't know.
Online.
In TV land, I think they call it, right? Right. Anyway, thank you so much.
Welcome.
Exceptional. Greatly appreciate. We're sending you the link
Okay.
that was shared in the chat comments.
Okay. Great.
I thank you.